All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our January webinar. This webinar will be focused on the SPRINT study, or the Stunt Performance Research Investigating Neurological Trauma, led by Dr. Jeff Russell, who will be coming on to speak with you as well. Let me explain a little bit about what the SPRINT study is. It is a collaboration between us here at BUCTE and the Ohio University Laboratory for Science, Health and Artistic Performance, or the SHAPE Lab. In a little bit, we'll go on to explain kind of what that is, but the big goal of the SPRINT study is to work with stunt performers to have them donate their brain and be studied for CTE post-mortem. And you'll hear a lot more about that in this webinar. We will be doing a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if you look on your toolbar, there is a Q&A option right next to the chat. So if you want to put any questions in there as we're going through the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, I will go through and have me or Dr. Russell or our two stunt performers talk about and answer that question. All right, so Dr. Jeff Russell is joining us today. If you could just give us a little wave, Dr. Russell. He is an associate professor of athletic training at Ohio University. He is the director of the Laboratory for Science and Health and Artistic Performance, or the SHAPE Lab, which is a clinic for artistic performers at Ohio University to get treated for injuries that happen on stage or in rehearsal or anything like that, almost in a very similar way of athletic trainers do for athletes. He also has a PhD in dance medicine and science from University of Wolverhampton, England. So he is we are very lucky to have him here with us today. And along with Dr. Russell, you'll be hearing from 4 others. The first one is Leslie McMichael, who has a PhD. She is a stunt coordinator, and she is from Cochrane, Canada. And our next person will be Greg POLJACIK. I'm so sorry, Greg. He is a stunt performer out of Chicago, Illinois. And then there's me, Cassandra Ferreira. I work in social media and digital marketing here at the BUCTE Center, and I will be verbally moderating this presentation. And then Amanda Cabral, who is my partner, also working in social media and digital marketing. She's going to be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A and kind of sending in links to the chat anytime that you might see information that you might want to follow up on. There most likely will be a link in the chat from Amanda of where you can get more information on that subject. All right, so I am going to hand it over to Dr. Russell to explain kind of the basics of what CTE is.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Cassie, and it is my honor to be here with the esteemed group from Boston University, the world leaders really in CTE and trying to discern CTE in people, and as well as anytime I can get together with Leslie and Greg is a treat for me. These are 2 of my favorite people in the world, incredible co-investigators in my research group, and we've come together because this is a potential problem in stunt performers, CTE, in the same way that we see CTE occurring in the list on the right there, all the different types of athletes, with military folks, with people that are just sadly involved in domestic violence events. All of these people have been shown to have suffered from CTE. The interesting thing about CTE, and perhaps something that seems a little strange as we talk about a study like this, is you can't diagnose it until someone's passed away and their brain is analyzed. And so it's a progressive disorder. It's something that builds over time. It's been linked now to repetitive head impacts. When this happens and there's these changes in the brain, all of the folks you see on the right that have been diagnosed this way, they've all given their brains to be studied. And that's a gift that's beyond my ability to express gratitude for. And so this is what we're doing now is in CTE for stunt performers, trying to determine whether this is an issue that they are that they're susceptible to, because we know that they have their heads hit quite a lot. So that's what CTE is in a nutshell. That's why we're doing this. This came about, actually, I might just share a quick word about this, Cassie. It came about because another one of my stunt performers in my research group, Lori Stewart from up in Canada, she's the first one who said, well, I wonder if the Boston University people would be interested in working with us on a study to look at CTE and stunt performers. And so that got my head moving, and then I started talking to Greg and to Leslie and others, and we got our heads together, and this is where we're at now, is being able to introduce this study and to be able to share the information with not just the stunt community, but with the public at large. Because I think that one thing is the public needs to be aware. You're watching movies, you're seeing these stunt performers do incredible work. There is more to the story, and their health is something that we want to be concerned with. So that's just a quick introduction to our study in CTE.
Yeah, 100%. And thank you to Lori for bringing us up, because we definitely want to be a part of this conversation. So what is SPRINT? I'm also going to hand that over to Dr. Jeff Russell. Do you want to just kind of break down exactly what SPRINT is and why you're doing it?
Yeah, so we've, as I just briefly introduced, we believe that there's a high probability that stunt performers will develop CT over the course of their lifetime of being involved in stunt performing. And this is something that in my view, and in Greg's and Leslie's view, and several other stunt performers in my research group, this is something that needs to be examined. We need to confront it. We need to deal with it, much as the NFL has had to confront it and deal with it. This is something that is really important, because people's health is at stake. These stunt performers are giving everything they've got for the entertainment industry. And it's really, really important, in my view, that we advocate for them, and that we put a stake in the ground and say, yes, we're going to look at this. We're going to help you. We're going to find out how we can assist the stunt community in dealing with some of the difficult issues that they confront with regard to their health. So really, as you can see on the slide, the main goal of this is working with that community to do this groundbreaking research, which is, as I mentioned, has been done in a variety of other populations, but we want to do it now with our stunt performers, because there's a real advocacy aspect to this, is trying to stand up for them and to promote their work and to promote their safety, promote their health. All of this is involved in the SPRINT study. And again, we're so indebted to Boston University, to the CTE Center, for coming alongside, because without that partner, this doesn't work. We don't even have a study. And then also acknowledging, and we'll mention in another couple of slides perhaps, but just to say how important it is to have stunt performers like Greg and Leslie who are bought into this, who believe in what we're doing, and are working actively with my research group.
Yes, thank you so much, Leslie and Greg. I am actually, I believe the next slide. Yes. So SPRINT is a community engaged study, bouncing off of what you said about how important it is to have stunt performers involved in this study, not only as research subjects, but also as a part of the community that can use their expertise in the field to enhance and guide the researchers. So I don't know which one of you would like to start, Leslie and Greg, but how did that kind of affect your decision to become involved, and how does that affect how you are involved in the study?
I can go first if you like. Well, I did my dissertation on the effects of concussions on stunt performers. And so this is something that I had realized because I was a stunt performer, that this was an issue. And I thought I would change my psychological studies to kind of focus more on concussions in that population. And so about 4 years ago, Dr. Russell reached out to me and asked if he could have a look at my dissertation, and it was completely out of the blue. And I was very happy about that. And I said, sure, here you go, have a look. And we started to have more discussions, and we just started collaborating on all kinds of different publications. We've got something in Popular Science, and now we've got our recent publication in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine. So it's been wonderful for me, because transitioning from a stunt performer to a stunt coordinator, I still get to keep that academic part of me going, even though I didn't really keep going with it. And I really enjoy it because my goal is to help stunt people and see them blossom as they go through their careers. Helps me as a coordinator. So it's just a win-win for me to be involved as a community member and as well as in the academic side. So.
Yeah, and I came across some of these papers. I was just doing my own reading and decided to reach out to Dr. Russell and say, hey, this is actually really interesting. I think the first one was about theater and dance performers and the concussions that they would engage or suffer. And when they described stunts in the industry, I was struck by how accurate the description was. I was expecting going in, I was like, okay, here's a research paper. Let's see how on the nail they get what the industry is like. And it described it pretty accurately, the stressors that we have for reporting injuries, just regular injuries, number one, but especially concussions. That the paper got the character of what it's like to feel worried or anxious about reporting any kind of detriment to your physical ability. So that made me want to reach out and contact and say, I want to help. You obviously understand what's going on, and I want to make sure that as we progress in this research, that understanding gets flushed out and continues to be rich. Because there are some other concerns of anonymity of not just the performer, but even certain cities and areas, right? If you do a research project and it comes out that this one area may have more incidences of concussions than another, that could be problematic for the industry at large. So we had to be very careful of how we accumulate the data and how we get people to buy in, because the goal is to get other stunt people to feel comfortable reporting, knowing that their careers are going to be safe if they do. So I felt like that was important to jump on board. And then for my own health and the health of people that I'm close to, I want to know the answers to this and to set up resources and a plan for when we decide to stop. Because I think the industry axiom is you either quit stunts or stunts quit you. And there's nobody there for us at the end of it. So it's setting up tools and resources to make sure that we're taken care of after we put in our work.
Yeah. Cassie, if I could add, just to talk about the community engagement and the importance of that. So in an academic environment, research is what happens, right? That's what we do. We live for research. But when you do community engaged research, and every bit of research that I do in my research group is community engaged. And so you're seeing that engagement today. So it means that I've got these researchers, right? I've got Leslie and I've got Greg, there's a handful of others that are in the community. I don't do anything in research with that community unless they give the okay, unless they sign off on it, unless they have bought into it first. So we go back and forth on everything from what surveys say to how emails are worded. And I mean, we work together. They are so legitimately co-investigators. They're on the the ethics review documentation for a university. Their names are on the research papers that are published. They are legitimately part of this. And so the key is kind of how we say it in academia is, instead of doing research on the community, we're doing research with the community. And there's a key difference there, because when you do research with the community is first and foremost. The community takes precedent. The community's needs and interests are first and foremost. And so that's, as a researcher, what I want to know. I don't know enough about stunt performing to be able to do the research by myself. That's why these guys are like gold to me, right? These two, and again, a handful of others in my group, these are people that make it work. If I didn't have them, I wouldn't be doing this. And it is absolutely key to this sprint study and every other project that we're working on.
Thank you. You read my mind. I was about to ask you to define a community engaged study. All right. So if you don't mind continuing to talk, would you mind just chatting with us about what other ways stunt performers are protected by the medical community, or studied, or in any way interacted with by the medical community?
Yes, you bet. So in my research group, and I don't know of another research group anywhere that's working with stunt performers, and that's just a simple observation. That's not trying to promote ourselves in any way. It's just we've seen a need, and we're trying to address the need, and again, work with the community. But the 5 bullets that you see here on the screen represent different areas where we have interest in pursuing research. And some of these are already actively moving. All of them have been kind of framed out, and we've got varying levels of progress on each one of them. But for example, take mental health concerns. This is a big one. I mean, just in society at large, mental health is an increasingly difficult and common issue. But the study that Leslie mentioned in the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine, and perhaps Amanda can put a link in the chat, because that is an open access, freely downloadable article for everybody. That particular article had a very interesting finding that we discussed. One of the things we measured in stunt performance, we surveyed over 200 stunt performers in Canada. And we found that one of the things we look at was a value that allowed us to see what is called their mental component score. So there's one value that kind of takes physical and mental health together, and then we can split it out to physical health and mental health. So we looked at the mental health component. 42% of the participants had a value on their mental health score that suggested they were depressed, that they had depression. And that was pretty scary. That was way larger of a number than we wanted to see. But what that did was it helped us understand that this is something that needs more research. We need to look at this a little bit more in depth. And there is already in the literature some body of knowledge that's suggesting mental health and concussions are related in some way. And so this is something we want to look at a little bit more in our stunt performers. Take low profile headgear. Well, you can't wear a football helmet or something similar when you're a stunt performer on set. Wardrobe and costuming and makeup, that just doesn't fly. And so what we're working on is a headgear that is fairly low profile, not a whole lot thicker than what you might see, where you would look at them and say, oh, that looks essentially like their head. Doesn't look like they actually have a helmet on. So there are some limitations and some difficulties, some challenges with that, but it's, everything about this is challenging. And that's why I like it, because I'm driven by challenge, by things that haven't been done before, and trying to figure out these difficult problems. So we're working there. There is a university and some colleagues of ours up in Canada that has looked at urinary biomarkers that can help identify concussions and give us some more data about whether someone has sustained a concussion or not. And they've recently gotten a patent on that and are actively doing that work. And so that is very exciting. They're excited to be able to work with us and us with them. And then looking at head accelerations, right? We can put sensors on the heads of our stunt performers while they're going through their stunts, doing their gags, and we can find out how fast the head is accelerating or decelerating. And while that's not a perfect match to what's actually going on with the brain, it at least gives us an idea of the kinds of forces that their heads are susceptible to. And it helps us design ways that might be able to ameliorate that or mitigate that kind of a situation. And then a research project that we just published was a retrospective study. So we asked the stunt performers, look back over your career and tell us what kind of experiences you've had with head impacts. And so there's an obvious problem of being able to remember everything, particularly if you get hit in the head quite a lot, as many of these fine folk do. But retrospective is not as good as what we call a forward-looking or a prospective study, where we're saying, okay, from now, looking forward, as you experience your career now, from now on, report to us what's happening. And so this is a much more difficult type of research. It's much more difficult to get buy-in from the participants that are involved, that are being measured, but it will give us a lot more accurate information as well. And so we're hopeful about that. So these are just areas that we're working on in my research group to try to understand this a lot more. And again, ultimately, remembering we're trying to make stunts safer, and we're trying to advocate for our stunt performer friends. We're trying to make sure that these guys are well taken care of and that they get the same level of care as might be expected of an NFL football team or an NHL hockey team or anybody else that's experiencing head impacts.
Thank you so much. We just put the shortened link to your latest paper in the chat for everybody if anybody wants to save the link or go look at it. All right. So although this is a study about brain donation, which is post-mortem, as stunt performers, Greg and Leslie, I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about when you feel it's time for you to say, I might have got my bell rung a little hard there. I might have to go see a doctor after this shoot or something like that.
Sure. Well, and this is the crux of the awareness issue that I really wanted to hit home with my dissertation, about how when people get a concussion that they advocate for themselves and just report it to the stunt coordinator, go do the paperwork at craft service, then your union has paperwork and they can help you. But it can also just help you as a performer, because the next time you go and perform, you're going to be a better performer. You're going to hit your mark. You're going to have good reaction time. You're going to know your choreography, things like that. But if you're just keep going and don't give it any kind of a focus that it needs, you're not going to get that time to recover. And so, once you start realizing you've got, like, it's all listed here with the memory loss, confusion, aggression, impaired judgment, slowed reaction time. Already mentioned that. Impulse control problems. Getting your bell rung is something that people kind of talk about, like kind of in a humorous way, like, oh, you got your bell rung. Oh, it was a good stunt. But that's actually a concussion. And so I remember when I presented my research at a stunt community meeting in Vancouver, to start it off, I said, hey, everybody, tell me what a concussion is. Give me your ideas of what a concussion is. And one guy, I'll never forget it, he said, it is when you have blood coming out of your ears. And I said, well, I believe that's a subdermal hematoma, and that's like a really serious issue. That's not at all like what a concussion is. That's on, it's like, whoa, like we're talking about concussion, And so I said, basically, when you've got your bell rung, you've got a concussion, and concussion now has to be diagnosed by a doctor. So you just know you've had a head impact, and you know that you should probably go see somebody. But and some of these other things that are listed on here with the anxiety and suicide and Parkinson's, that would relate to, I think, more getting further on into like multiple impacts over time. But I think that, you have your bell rung. I think it's great to go see your doctor and actually tell your stunt coordinator what's going on, so they know what's going on with you, that they're your boss. I love it when people tell me that something's wrong, because otherwise I'm always like just making sure they're telling me, and okay, I'll tell the paramedics, go check them out. So, because they don't always want to. And some are combative, that they really don't want to talk about it. So I guess it's just a culture shift that I would love to see in the future, where people can advocate for themselves.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, I'm so sorry, Greg. Go
Oh,
right
no,
ahead.
it's all good. You're all good. No, I just want to say that I totally agree. And it's a industry-wide kind of culture shift, because I know I even felt this as a younger performer, and am still working to change my mentality about it, that there's always tomorrow. I can go through this, and I can be tough now, and I won't always do this. I'll get to some point where I can rest. So I can get to some point where I can heal, or somewhere down the line. But something about concussions that I didn't know as a young performer, and to put out there, is that it's insidious. It's some of these smaller impacts. It's not always a big impact. They're finding that with more and more studies on it, that it could be these subconcussive events that accumulate over time, that if you're looking for the big ones, sure, you definitely want to report those, but then just these little things that we're accumulating in practice and training that add up over time, that we might not be being honest with ourselves too, right? So it's one thing to be on set, and we do need absolutely to have a supportive atmosphere and coordinators like Leslie that we can go to and trust that this isn't going to be a knock on the rest of my career. They're not going to think that I am no longer able to work or a liability. But we have to be honest with ourselves as performers when we get hit during training. I mean, I shared yesterday when we were doing a practice session how I got hit in the head last week. And it took me a day or two to realize I was being a hypocrite by continuing to train. Part of it's because of the love of it, and changing that culture that I came up with, that when you're in sports, it's just part of the game. It's just, you just keep going. You got to be tough. You got to be strong. And, it's hard to let that go. And I think the more that we talk about this and normalize it, and the more voices out there saying, no, it's okay to take a break. It is okay to rest, because right now the dominant message out there is hustle, hustle, hustle. You're not training. You're not working. What are you doing? You're being lazy. So no, our bodies need to rest. Our brains need to rest. We're asking a ridiculous amount from our physical resources, and that messaging is something that I hope changes, especially around impacts to the head and injuries to the head.
Yeah, and with this research, that's definitely something that we're trying to change, is the stigma against coming out when you have an injury or when you have had your bell rung. All right. One thing that may help with that is that Sprint is 100% confidential and anonymous. If Dr. Russell, if you could speak a little bit more on the confidentiality of Sprint.
Absolutely. This is the linchpin, or the absolute foundation of what we're doing here. Because if the stunt performers don't believe that their information is going to be held in confidence, then why would they want to participate? And so we have this research set up so that everything is confidential, so that no one's going to be sharing their name back with the stunt community or the production filming community. I mean, none of that. This is 100% confidential. And I'll just say that Boston University CTE Center has been doing this a long time. And there isn't anybody I'd rather do this with than them, because they've been doing it for so long, so well. Their track record is beyond reproach. And I just really believe in their manner and in their people and in their procedures. And so, I don't know how many other ways we can say it, but we have done everything to protect the stunt performers who decide that they're willing to sign on to this study and to be a part of it. I mean, it is what it is. It's just strange to talk about a study where you have to be dead before you can participate. But let's just put that out there and tell it like it is. That's this type of research. And it's okay. And we can talk about it. And it needs to be talked about, because this is how we make things better. This is how we progress in our world of such high activity and such a number of potentials for head impacts. So absolutely inscrutably confidential, and I will stake my career on that being true. And been doing this more than 40 years, so I hope that's worth something. But BU is the real deal, and we're alongside them, and we've committed to this. So thank you for allowing us to make that firm statement.
Thank you. Right. So I think one of the final things that we are trying to communicate during this webinar is not only why you should sign up and take part and why it's happening, but how, because signups and registration is open. So I'm going to hand it over to one of our research coordinators, Madeline Uretsky, who is the contact person for the sprint study, to kind of explain what the process is of getting involved and what the process is of registering.
Yeah, thank you, Cassie. And I'm so excited that I was able to join today. This has been a long time coming, working on behind the scenes on getting this started with Dr. Russell and his team. So we're really excited. As Dr. Russell mentioned, us as a research team at BU CTE have been doing this for over 15 years now. And we've worked with over 1,300 families of the brain donors and doing this process. So we've been doing this for a long time, and we have such a passionate group that's really invested in this work. And as others have mentioned, it's really been about more the team sport athletes to this point, more about the NFL, the NHL, wrestling, even, the military veterans, more so larger groups of people that the public is more aware of. But we know now that there are so many stunt performers that are suffering from concussions based on, partially in Dr. Russell's work. So we're so grateful to be collaborating with you all. And even just something I want to say, as the coordinator and how you can really kind of take this message is that, as stunt performers, you all are professional athletes too. And just because the public doesn't necessarily know as much about what you do and know as much about you, we're still watching your movies, your TV shows, and your health matters. And so that is, one of the main reasons why we're doing this is because we really do want to help. There are so many athletes that we, study every year, and we just want to be able to kind of add you all to that group too. So as Cassie mentioned, this is, confidential. None of our research information is made public unless, the next of kin, who is, our study contact upon a participant's passing, unless they, sign a written consent form to make that okay. So we don't share anything. Everything's stored confidentially on very particular servers. So there's nothing that is, made public in that way. It's also shared amongst only individuals who are involved in the specific study. So not even everybody at the CTE Center is involved in this particular group. So it won't even be amongst the entire team. So it's a very small group of people that would have any access to this information. And so you can be, rest assured that that is very important to us. And really what Greg said, again, I want to kind of emphasize is this whole project is all about the advocacy, getting people to talk about their mental health, their concussions, reporting them, so that people are aware that this is a problem in the stunt performing community. Because once people acknowledge that it's a problem, then they, are more willing to participate in research so that we can then help them. And the goal of Sprint really is just to be another cohort within our larger brain bank study. So our larger brain bank study that we've been doing for so long, it will go, any participant will go through the same procedures that they would for that. So we don't have anybody sign any consent forms until either very close to passing or until after passing. So the next of kin would then sign it. So the main goal in getting people to be interested and express their interest in brain donation now is so that these conversations can start with their families, having that intention, telling a spouse, hey, I'm just, just so you know, and we can talk about how those conversations might look, but this is my wish upon my passing, just like anyone would with a will or anything like that. It's, I want my brain donated here because I want to help further research. And it's as simple as that, is expressing the intent. And then if you let, to essentially register for the study, it's not even really signing up for anything until, that time does come, which we hope is, not anytime soon. So this will be going on for a long time. But we want to just kind of gauge numbers, who is interested. We want to know how many people we might be expecting down the line, and what their head trauma history might look like. Because ultimately we do want to be able to help make your profession safer. And so basically to sign up or to express your interest in brain donation, or even ask any more questions about the study or about brain donation in general, or more about our work, my email's there. So you can feel free to email me anytime. We can set up a call, a chat, or if you prefer email, that's completely fine too. But I'm here to help and to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Madeline. And thank you again for coming on to talk about the registration process a little bit. All right. I believe it is our time for Q&A. Let me take a look. All right. I believe I'm going to give this one. Actually, Madeline, since you are on, would you mind if I gave you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you kind of give a little bit of advice into how, as you said, how that conversation with a loved one might go about donating your brain and notifying them of your wishes?
Yeah, I think we kind of talk about this all the time in the work that we do, and how it is very uncomfortable to talk about death so early on in somebody's life. But without having these conversations, then when the time does come, things can get very complicated and very confusing for people. And so if people don't know what your wishes are, then they can't help, essentially, when the time does come. So we always kind of tell people to approach a loved one saying, I know this might be uncomfortable to hear, or I'm okay, but I want you to know this. So kind of prefacing it so they're not completely put off and completely kind of struck by what you're saying. We like to tell people and acknowledge the fact that it is an uncomfortable conversation. And then just expressing the fact that, this, I heard about this study. I really think that it's something I would want to participate in. I would appreciate, upon my passing, if you could help make this happen, and here's how. And whenever anyone does, email me to express interest, I'll go into further detail on what that end process looks like, just so you're aware. But essentially it's having a loved one call our pager number, and that we have an on-call coordinator 24 hours a day who coordinates brain donation. I'm one of those individuals, and there's a couple others in our group, and they're the ones that handle the brain donations any hour of the night. And they do it all over the US and Canada. And even, we have partner groups now in the UK, Australia, that we've worked with. So wherever you are, we are able to help make it happen. And it's really just a simple phone call.
Thank you so much, Madeline, for that very, very informative answer. Let me look at the next couple. All right, I think I'm gonna direct this to Dr. Russell. This question is, has a stunt performer's brain been donated and observed yet? And if so, were there signs of CTE present?
There are as I understand it, in the CTE Center, there is perhaps a couple of individuals who were stunt performers. I'm not aware that the results of those analyses have been released, or I mean, if that work's been finished, I'm not aware that they've been released. They certainly have not been released in the research literature, and so Madeline may be able to carry on with further piece of the answer, but the answer is yes, there are a couple, but we don't really know yet until you have a certain number of individuals. It's just a basic tenet of research. Until you have a certain group of individuals that's large enough to be able to make a judgment about whether something is occurring or not, it becomes very difficult to make predictions. And so that's why this is a really important study, is so we can increase the number of stunt performers information that we have access to help us decide, is this sufficiently a problem that we really need to go to the industry and work on a change in culture. I think we all believe that we need to have a change in culture, but we don't have data in this particular study to be able to make those kinds of judgment calls.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, that's exactly right. It's just the sheer number is not there to be able to. And anecdotally, there's individuals that even claiming that they're stunt performer that have been in TV and movies, individuals who are involved in more extreme sports as well, people who are doing motocross and BMX and all those sorts of more individualized and winter sports, ski jumping, things that are a little bit less known where a lot of concussions can happen. A lot of those kind of come in and we're trying to make sense of that too. And another, I think, important point here is, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of stunt performers start off doing other sports or being involved in other sports as well. And that's super important for us to know too, because a lot of what our work has shown is the earlier somebody starts, for example, in American football, getting their head hit, potential worse outcomes are there. So are they playing sports at younger ages and then moving into stunt performing? And what does that progression look like? And how is their earlier potential head trauma from sports maybe affecting them later? And so that's just a whole area we have no idea about at this point. So that's another kind of result of what we might want to understand from all of this.
Yes, thank you so much, Madeline, and thank you, Dr. Russell. I honestly, this next question can definitely be split between Dr. Russell, Leslie, and Greg all together. What are some of the newest treatments and treatment modalities out there to help possibly heal the brain, or ways to manage brain health, depression, anxiety, PTSD, post-concussion syndrome, dysautonomia, insomnia, etc.? So I was thinking Dr. Russell could talk about the treatment a little bit, and then maybe if Greg and Leslie, you want to talk about maybe some coping mechanisms that you've used after an injury, or if you felt a little run down.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and our desire to be able to treat concussions and other head injuries far outstrips our ability to do it, to be honest. And some things are important to understand at the baseline. One is that every concussion is different. If you had the exact same blow to two different people, you could have two different concussive injuries. They act so differently because the brain is such an unbelievably plastic organ, and it's just the way it's situated in the skull. And I mean, there's so many variables that have to do with how a concussive impact plays out in the brain. Now, I think it's really key to remember. I tell my students this, matter of fact, this week I have a course I teach at the university that is about head injuries, and I'm teaching our athletic training students. And I also have talked about this with my undergraduate students who are in a performing arts medicine class that I teach. So if you want to know how much you don't know, study the brain, because we know precious little even now about the brain and how it functions and how to deal with it. But there are all kinds of things. The days of closing somebody in a dark closet for a few days to keep them from being stimulated so they can recover from their concussion, thankfully those days are over. We know that's not the right way to do it. But some things that we do know now. So moderated aerobic exercise is something that actually seems to be very, very helpful. There are a variety of techniques in physical therapy, in physical medicine, rehabilitation, in neurology. There's a variety of different kinds of treatment modalities that are being employed in psychology. You think about the neuropsychologists and some of the expertise they bring to the table. And so I think one of the things that I'm wanting you to get out of this description is there's not a single person that really understands everything about how to deal with this concussion. It takes a multi-pronged approach, multi-person, multi-specialty, just lots of different angles of information, because the brain is so complicated and no two concussions are the same. So that, I think, is the best way to at least start to answer that. We know at the very beginning, in the first day, that we do want to reduce the stimulation. We do want to reduce the computer use and the phone use and the things that tend to make the symptoms worse. We want to reduce those things, but then we want to start someone on a moderated, key word, and we don't just tell people, well, do whatever you want or do whatever you feel like. We want it to be moderated by a healthcare professional that understands how to deal with concussions, but it should be a moderated, graduated process of activity, and gradually getting back into cognitive work. We have this whole area we call return to learn for students, right? Like, what do you do with a student when they have to concentrate on their studying? Well, we need a return to learn protocol. And that word protocol you hear all the time. You watch an NFL game and talk about protocol. They're always in a protocol if they have a concussion, right? So we have protocols that we use for the different types of performing artists. But again, it's graduated. It increases over time. You're looking for symptoms to be getting worse, in which case you would back down. If they don't get worse, that you can keep increasing in your treatment. But these are the kinds of things that we want to use. The thing is that someone should not be doing that on their own. They need to have continual evaluation and that input from qualified healthcare providers. I think that's really, really essential. And then maybe if Greg and Leslie want to talk about some of their own experiences, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to, as far as the physical aspect, because it's trying to manage some of the mental effects that come with a concussion and having time down as well. So part of that is keeping an eye on certain coping mechanisms that may be unhealthy and exacerbating the problem. Like, so typically, people are feeling down. One of the things that a lot of people might go to is more alcohol use and more isolation. And so it's trying to work to recognize when that is a negative coping mechanism, especially for an injury. And then coming back to training is how to restart and start in those smaller steps, kind of like that return to learn. Instead of going back to training full blast and ignoring that it's a problem and trying to push through, where are different ways that I can go back to basics and just work that for a little while and see the value in working those basics and going back to fundamentals, where I still get to train, I still get to use my body, but I'm using it in a far less impactful way for a little while to allow my brain to heal and to still get that aerobic exercise that is shown time and again that to be an aid to healing instead of just laying there. Especially for a mover, just laying there is very, very difficult for us to do. Maybe a day you're going to get a physical person to lay still for one day if you're lucky, and then they're going to want to move and they're going to want to do something. So it's finding the most effective movements to promote healing instead of causing it to last much longer than it needs to be. And admittedly, that's still a process that I'm working on. That you're without a medical professional telling you to do it. If you're doing it on your own, it's going to be a longer healing process. But I think the highlight and the commonality is going back to basics, restarting and building back up slow, and finding the joy and importance of those building blocks instead of seeing that as a detriment, as a negative, to say, no, this is actually really good. This isn't fun. Where's the joy at these basic things? And you might learn something that you might have missed.
Okay, Jeff, I don't know if I told you about this one. I had a concussion in 2001 where it looked like I rammed my head into an SUV on a show called Dark Angel. And it's because the vehicle did not end up on its mark, and I was already flying through the air. So it's pretty unavoidable, but I took 2 weeks off of work. The coordinator brought somebody else in to do what needed to be done during those days. And I just took time off. I didn't do much of anything. I slept, I just hung out. I didn't really do all that much. You can still walk and you can still do things, but just no like really heavy athletic anything. And I did feel kind of like I was underwater for about the first 2 or 3 days. And then it just started getting better. And then when I was brought back on, the first few days that I was needed were light days. I didn't have to do anything really jarring or anything. I think it was driving or something like that. So that's how I dealt with it. I stayed away from alcohol. Just tried to eat right. That's how I dealt with that one. That's the worst one I've ever had.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That's insane. I have another question for Leslie and Greg. We hear a lot about in the NFL concussion protocol, as Dr. Russell said. I was wondering, is there something along the same lines for stunt performers, or have you observed anything on set or in training, if you're able to talk about it, that might be like a typical way that people handle concussions in the stunt community?
A typical way to handle concussion on set, there is no real protocol at all. So all I can talk about is how I would go about it, whether it's a concussion or it's like your leg or whatever it is. It's like I go in and first of all, I'm like, get the okay from the person, go in, talk to them. Are you all right? You all right? And kind of do a little bit of an assessment of if they're okay. If they're not okay, then everything just has to slow right down. And I take the person and we go talk to the first AD. Okay, we're going to go do some paperwork. We're going to see the paramedic if we have one there that day, and go through the process of at least getting, and this is just any injury on set, just the paperwork. This is what happened. This is, what occurred, who are the personnel. And then from there, we see if they need to have any further evaluation. And of course, I want them to go see a doctor. But every set is different. Some sets aren't really all that safety oriented, and some are very safety oriented. So there's quite a range, but there is no like on-set concussion protocol.
Yeah, the onus is typically on the performer to come forward. I mean, we may all be watching and assume, you can tell when somebody took a gnarly hit. You're like, that probably hurt. And because there's no one on the outside looking to be the one to say, no, that was definitely concussion, or I need to check you out, it's really up to the performer to come forward and say, yeah, I'm not feeling right. And it's up to a good coordinator, right? Like if you've got a good community and a good coordinator who's keeping an eye, you can tell when your performer is off. You can tell when something's not right. You know, all of a sudden they're on the wrong mark, or if they previously remembered the choreo, now they're missing some beats, or their timing is off. Or if you look in anybody's eyes after they've had their bell rung, you can pretty much tell, like, you don't know where you are right now. So a good community that supports you is going to be there to take care of you and have their own protocol in place. So yeah, we don't have anybody on the outside who's kind of doing that, which would be great to have an advocate to take the pressure off of the coordinator and the performer to be doing this and diagnosing ourselves, because it's not only our health that's on the line in the future. I think a lot of people deal with and struggle is that it's our livelihood that, you know, for some folks, it can be feast or famine. And if you're in a famine and it's been the first day you're working in a long, long time and you take a knock, you would be very hesitant to say something, which is unfortunate. We should feel comfortable saying something at any point. But if we had a protocol and somebody out there that took that pressure off, as much as it would still be a sting to lose those days of work, you no longer have to make the decision as a person. Do I do this and sacrifice this? What am I sacrificing now? What am I going to make back in the future? And so that's too much pressure for a performer to make in the moment, especially when the brain is scrambled. So.
Yes, thank you so much, Greg and Leslie. Greg, I do have a question directed at you. It says this question is for Greg. Have you ever experienced a traumatic injury on set and felt unable to express the severity of it for fear of being judged or losing work?
I'm going to say, fortunately, no. Our community here in Chicago is really good and supportive. I trust all of our coordinators and our other performers. So I've never felt like I had an injury that was bad enough that I couldn't say anything to anybody and be taken care of. That's in the community. As I've said before, I'm trying to get past my own personal, things that I've come up with and culture of, just being raised to be tough and to be strong and get past that. So internally, yes, I've kind of had injuries that I've hidden because I want to, fit into an image of what I've expected to be as a stunt man and what I feel like it should be. But thankfully, for the community that I've been a part of and the shows I've been a part of, I've been fortunate to be on shows where that's never been a pressure. That if I've been injured, I can go up to them and say, hey, I'm hurt. That one hurt me. And it hasn't been enough that I need to be taken out of the production. It's enough to say the next take, we need to cool it a little bit, or I need some time just to let this recover so it doesn't become a worse one next time. So I'm also fortunate in that aspect that the hits that I've taken have not been enough to put me out, but they've been enough to sometimes say something to somebody and then have that supported. That it's actually encouraged too. Our coordinators here have been very encouraging to say, look, if you're hurt, it's going to help us. It's like frustrating if it doesn't. Like, we can tell you're hurt. It's going to mess the shot up, or you're going to get even more hurt. And now we take you out. Just tell us if you're hurt. And that's been the MO of our guys. So that's been pretty great.
Yeah, that is amazing. And hopefully we can get that mindset across all stunt performers and all over the world. All right. I believe that was the last Q&A question that we have time for. If you have any other questions, we did put the link in the chat. It is a link to our webpage where we have all the information on all of our clinical studies, including this sprint project. And I am going to leave this slide up for a little bit. It's some of our contact information. It also has the Madeline's email so that you can register for Sprint if you want to write that down, or if you want to take any screenshots or pictures of this slide. I'm just going to leave it up. But overall, thank you all so much for attending, and thank you to our wonderful presenters. You guys were amazing. This was incredibly informational, and I am just so grateful that you were able to come on and speak about this.
We're more than thankful for Boston University CTE Center, and as we've gotten to know you all, it's just really been exceptional to have this partnership. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. I'm grateful that you saw what we saw when we first came to you to discuss this. And yeah, it's very exciting. So the honor has been all mine to participate. Another place of honor is to Leslie and Greg, and to have them alongside me in this. Like I said before, community engagement, wouldn't do it without them, can't do it without them. And so Leslie and Greg, my hat's off to you. And I am now watching the credits roll and honoring our stunt performers on every movie or anything else, television, anything else that I see, because your work's tremendous. And it's just a privilege to be able to walk this journey with you. And my heart's desire, as you know, is that we can make your world safer and increase the longevity of you and your colleagues. So thank you for the chance to work with you.
Of course. Thank you guys so much. And I will see you in a little bit. And thank you to everybody for attending. I'm just going to leave up this slide for a little bit while everybody exits.